Welcome back. Let's get started. So this unit will talk about the self and personality. So I'm going to start with a question. Say I ask you, who are you? How do you answer that question? Not with, I mean, your name might be one thing. How might people answer that question? I'm going to get the door while you think about it. Catchbox is dead. That's why I'm not using it. Yes.
Yeah. Your age, what you do for work.
Yeah. So your age. So you could say like I am, 19. And that gives you some information about a person. Like if I say that I'm going to introduce you to my friend, to someone called John, well, you just guess his gender from that. But if I tell you that John is 30, that gives you some information compared to if I said John was 3. You're going to have very different expectations of him. So yeah, your age, because age is, they say age is just a number, but it's correlated with stuff. And if I said that John was 80, you'd have different expectations even then. So age, so that says something about development of the self. You tell me you're 20, I think, oh, maybe you're still in school, maybe you're not. And then the other one was very interesting. What was it? What do you do? Or am I repeating that correctly?
What you do for work.
Fascinating, yeah. Occupation. Specifically as work. Sounds like we spend a lot of time doing that. Could be a source of identity. I saw another hand. Here and then there. Yeah.
I was just fixing my hair, but
Okay.
I think like nationality.
Nationality, yeah, it might mean something to say that you're Canadian or you're Jamaican, or some people have no nationality because of political reasons, and that can be a bit of an identity crisis and a lot of other crises. So your nationality. So maybe you're Canadian. Maybe that means something. Back there.
Social status.
Social status. Ooh, very interesting. What does social status mean?
Social status, whether you, for example, you're a member of the royal family.
So like class status. Very interesting. Yeah, if you're a member of the aristocracy, it means something. Versus if you're sewing our clothes in Bangladesh. We sort of outsource our lower social classes. So social class, very interesting. Most people never think of that in psychology. Well done. Yes?
I feel like that can be connected to a name. When someone asks me who are you, and then you say a name.
Yeah, I'm Tanya.
Suspect that
Yeah.
you're a higher class.
Am I hearing you correctly? Because there's the mask and my hearing, and I think you said name, like N-A-M.
It's just the name.
And that the name communicates something about social class, right? Because Catherine is higher class than Shanika.
Maybe even the last name, because they're going to tell you if it's a famous last name, for example.
Yeah.
You're expecting to be recognized.
Yeah. In Britain, certain names have higher social classes. They sound like you're descended from the Normans. Molyneux, for example. So your name, and when I sort of say something like, oh, I'm Tanya, well, what the heck does that mean? To me, it means my entire personal journey and my soul, but names do convey information about social class. A lot of your last names are occupational, like if your name is Miller or Cartwright or Smith, that says something about your ancestors' occupations. Where's the next hand? There? I hope I'm going in the right order. Hi.
Hi. Tell them your likes and your interests.
Yeah, kind of like your hobbies. Likes and interests are associated. We're often like things that we're interested in. We can engage in something and then learn to like it. So interests, as in like maybe you like doing art, you're an artist. Interests. Where are more hands? Yes.
Gender identity.
Gender, yes, that contains a lot of information. You know, if I say I'm a man or a woman, that brings in like even all those stereotypes that we talked about last time. So yeah, gender identity. Who did I miss? Yes.
You might say like if you're a parent or if you want to find out your family in that way.
Ooh, parent. You said something about family. This is like a social role.
Yeah.
Interesting. We'll have a unit on career psychology, but the word career means very different things from the perspective of industrial organizational psychology, which works for management, and vocational psychology, which sort of works for the individual. And managers, when they use the word career, from that perspective, it means your job in an organization. But from the perspective of vocational psychology, it's the constellation of your public social roles over your life course. Students a social role, parents a social role, artist is a social role. And it's like you, I'm going to have you think of them for assignment too, but think of it like a rainbow. They're all the bands of the rainbow that you kind of walk along across your life course. Yes?
The way you dress?
The way you dress. So what does that convey? Help me with that one.
Different forms of how you dress, like you dress in a suit to convey that you're professional.
Yeah.
Whereas
yeah.
I'm dressing in a t-shirt to convey that I'm not actively in a professional environment.
I was experimenting with the sort of jersey fabric, and I was wondering if I could get away with it. Okay, but that's kind of going back to things like social class and social role. Like a nurse wears and what a nurses wear, scrubs, right? And doctors wear that white coat, and professors wear academic-looking nerdy suit. I don't know, but that is part of a social role is costume. You have a different costume for when you're a student. I have a different costume for when I'm teaching. I have a different kind of costume for when I'm in these different theaters, like the nightclub, right? I don't wear those outfits here. I felt like I missed someone. It's actually really hard to do this and pick out hands. I never knew that when I was a student. But okay, I think I got it. Great. This is interesting. So, what is this telling me? You're thinking of identity as social roles. Is what you do. Occupation goes back to a social role. Demographics, like age and gender, that are correlated with a bunch of stuff. There's also social roles that go with being like a man or a woman, right? There's expected behaviors and norms. Different social roles expected for people of different classes. And then maybe there's things that are kind of private to you, like what your interests are. But your roles are going to change over your life course. You're not always going to be a student, right? What happens to yourself then? Your identity is based on being a student, and now you can't afford the tuition. Right? What happens if yourself is about your occupation, your work, and then you get laid off? I used to be a layoff consultant. I'd be the person that comes in with a brochure, like, have you thought about your future? And some people take it really well, and other people just look like they were hit by a train. But it stays a part of your identity. You'd always get to say, well, I worked for J.D. Irving, or I was a student. It's part of your life history, and your memory is part of your psyche. So psychology is a crossover discipline between philosophy and biology. And biologically, it's obvious that you're an individual animal and your personal experience is happening inside your brain, not your heart like the ancient Egyptians thought it was. And that's the organ that controls your behavior. I was sitting in the faculty lounge working on this, and then, do you guys know Mark Mercer? He's a philosopher. He watches these lectures. He came up to me and said that he didn't think that psychology was about the brain. That's what biologists do. Psychologists are interested in behavior. I think he has a point. Anyway, we can get very philosophical about what a self is. And there's a you that's the only you that has ever been or will ever be out of billions of people. living now or whoever lived. But we're social animals. We're not like cats. And you're always going to be defined in the context of your relationship to other people and your place in society, which you guys are really onto. And those labels like mother and student and daughter and artist, they're all social roles that come with sort of narratives and scripts that you're supposed to follow, right? There's a sense of what a good mother is and what a sort of a bad mother is. There's a sense of kind of what's good performance for a student, what's bad, okay? And there's expectations as well. And then you're also developing, right? You get, your age communicates a lot about you, okay? But then, you might say, like, I'm a student or I'm a writer, but you were still you when you were a baby with no self-awareness or language or thought of reading or writing or even going to school. And you'll still be you when you're 90, but you won't look the same and your interests might have completely changed, right? And hopefully you have a whole lot more memories. So there's some you that endures all those changes and it transcends those labels and those stories that can shift and pivot and act and adapt and act outside of the boxes, right? And there's a you that's aware of yourself, of your experiences, of your feelings, of your thoughts, right? There's a part of your psyche that is conscious, and then there's a part of your psyche that's unconscious. So your consciousness isn't your entire self, right? It's not your whole psyche, which historically is a term that gets this idea of soul, which you could secular humanize as the kind of unique kernel of your individuality. So let's start with self-concept. Okay, you have a perception of yourself. These are all part of your self-concept. Self-concept is different from self-efficacy. Self-efficacy is your sense of competence on a task. You might have high academic self-efficacy. That means you believe that you can do it. You can read the textbook, understand it, take notes, stay mostly awake in class, and get through it. But let's say you thought you didn't have that, then you might feel like, oh, I can't do that. I can't focus. I can't understand this textbook, right? That would be low academic self-efficacy. That's a matter of perception. And I wonder, is high self-efficacy always good? That's a question. Should you always have high self-efficacy? Yes.
It could cause overconfidence with bias.
I can't hear you.
It could cause overconfidence with bias.
It could. And what might be happening there is that your self-efficacy is overshooting your actual skill or competence. And maybe that's not so good. In psychology, we often talk as if high self-efficacy and high self-esteem are sort of good and desirable of themselves. But maybe there's a context behind that. So I propose that it's best if your sense of self-efficacy is appropriate to your level of skill and appropriately hopeful. I recall a young lady with bipolar disorder who thought that she would fly if she jumped off the top of a building. She had a sort of a can-do attitude. She believed she could do it. And so that's an example of high task-based self-efficacy that's not good, because that's not going to end well. And I'm glad that someone stopped her. But let's think about that mismatch. So let's say that your academic skills are like quite poor, but you have really high academic self-efficacy. And just like you suggested, then maybe in that case, you might walk into a test sort of overconfident and unprepared. All that positive self-talk actually messed you up. And then let's flip it around. Let's say that your academic skills are quite good, but you have really low academic self-efficacy, and you're thinking, I can't do this, I'm gonna fail, there's no point, I should just give up now. And then you undermine yourself, because you actually could have done it without all the negative self-talk. Your sense of self-efficacy, which should be about a task, not a global thing like ability to cope with all of life. Depressed people make these global evaluations. They're not about like one thing or a context. It's like everything. I can't do anything right. So it's most adaptive when it's contextualized and when it's rational. So you have goals, you have tasks, you have skills, and you have a capacity to learn new skills that is not infinite. And so I would offer that the place of greatest adaptivity is to have like a reasonable assessment of the skills that you need for a task and awareness of what your skills actually are. And sometimes there's a gap. There's different things you could do about that gap. Like maybe you get to go on a journey and learn something new and you fail a bit, and that's part of the journey. Or maybe you pick a different goal because you don't want to invest the time in that, okay? Or maybe you ask for help, or maybe you delegate the task to someone else. Self-esteem is your feeling of self-worth, of being a worthy human. The textbook struck me as kind of struggling with whether high self-esteem is good. Like I got the sense that there was some mixed messages, because they say, oh, you know, it correlates with, you know, persistence at difficult tasks and with happiness. But those are correlational studies, and so we don't know the direction of the correlation. And then they're concerned about narcissism. That's when you think way too much of yourself. They consider some risks, like say if you overestimate yourself, then you might do something that's dangerous, right? If you're not aware of your own lack of competence. And we all lack a lot of competence. There's lots of things I'm incompetent at. Could lead you to be excessively optimistic. What if you think, well, lots of people get addicted to cocaine, but I won't because I'm different. We naturally have self-serving biases. They help us survive. Right? We tend to perceive ourselves as favorably and to blame other people when things go wrong. If you ask students whether their grades are below average, average or above average, something like 85% of students say that their grades are above average. Grades tend to be normally distributed, bit of skew, but 85% of students don't have grades that are above average. We have a tendency to accept personal responsibility when things go well, but when they don't, then we're more likely to sort of blame others or the environment. And so could having high self-esteem be risky? I don't know. What do you think? There's an awful lot of self-help books there about self-esteem. People go see psychologists and counselors because they want higher self-esteem. The last person that called me said, I just want to feel good about myself. Yes.
Is there not a difference feeling worthy and feeling better than others?
Ooh, very interesting. Is there a difference between feeling worthy and feeling better than others? Yes. Yeah.
Feeling better than others, you're constantly comparing yourself to other people and want to be
better because of someone else.
Yeah.
When it's yourself, it's
Yeah.
both, not comparing it to everyone. So I think that's maybe the difference.
Yeah. I think, yes.
Settle for something that is less, you know, like what you want and what you deserve.
So you're going to treat yourself with respect
Yeah, exactly.
instead of kind of abusing yourself. Now that I have higher self-worth, I feel like I'm allowed to go to bed on time and I can say no to evening events because protecting my sleep is something that I permit myself to do that. There was a time when I was probably your age when I would like stay up all night to get things done and no. Any other hands? Yes.
Theoretical question, because I always thought like in the last line you were saying like maybe having high self-esteem will cause narcissism, but I feel like that's not what self-esteem is. Like you said, like in your definition that it was like self-worth.
But the worth of a person, yeah.
Right. But like I don't think that your self-worth has anything to do with like narcissism. I thought, maybe this is just because I don't know what the word means, but I thought it was like only thinking about yourself, but to be able to consider yourself worthy, you have to consider yourself other people.
Narcissists think that they're better than other people. They're a better class of person. They're worthy of more and better things, and they should have more money and they should have more power and they deserve leniency because they're extra special kind of humans. And so you're onto this idea that like when there's higher or lower self-worth or worth for others, we're creating hierarchies of worth. Like some people are worth more than others. So like let's say that you're pursuing self-esteem. What should that be based on? Right? If I want to go and increase my self-esteem, or I'm going to have a moment where I feel high self-esteem, what is that kind of based on? Like, should it be based on physical attractiveness? So if I lose weight, if I put on some makeup, should I feel better about myself? What would I end up doing if I played that game? I might spend more time looking in the mirror, taking selfies, editing selfies, shopping for clothes, getting my hair done. I might start investing in that. Maybe every time I see a picture, I want to look for myself in it and see if I look good and oh no, my profile. And I don't know, should I get my nose fixed? Maybe my hair should have more volume. You start kind of going down this path. And then maybe I do get my nose fixed and I feel better for a little bit. People tend to have an increase in perceived sense of well-being after they get plastic surgery, but does it stay up there? No, it comes back down and they need to get more plastic surgery because actually there's this line here. I could get rid of that. And, right, it kind of keeps going. And what about like academic ability? Should I have high self-worth because I have high academic ability? And what would be the implications of that for other people? Like, let's say there's a person with low academic ability and an IQ score of 80. Am I worth more than that person? Is that person worth less than me? Or the approval of others? Should I feel better about myself if more people like me and say good things about me? That'd be an interesting game to play. I have to be constantly thinking about what other people are thinking about me and knowing what they're saying about me and being upset if it isn't positive. And I'd be worried, you know, if I go to a party, does everyone like me? Now they're not allowed to have their own thoughts and preferences because I need to, that's kind of go down a path of being very worried about what other people think and not really respecting them enough to let them dislike me. About social status. What happens in societies when some people are aristocrats? Could be fun for the aristocrats. I don't know though. They get chased by paparazzi a lot. When you have a higher social class, it doesn't sort of leave everyone else in the middle, create a lower social class as well. And so when some people have extra rights and privileges and we care what they say and they do and they think and we're lenient with them when we make mistakes, there's a flip side to that. Somewhere out there, maybe it's in a factory in Bangladesh, there's people who matter less, whose voices aren't heard, right? Who can get hurt in the workplace and not compensated for those injuries, right? Because they matter less. We did that. So if you play these games, you might feel good about yourself for all your accomplishments. The game of accomplishments is another one that sometimes we try to play to get self-worth. But what I observe about folks who, I don't know, are really into that competitive career thing, is that they get the prize. And then is that good enough? Are they like, I'm done now? No, it's on to the next thing. And the next thing. It kind of doesn't really end. It's kind of like the plastic surgery thing. So, you know, if we value people on the basis of making a lot of money, well, then we're saying that other people are worth less if they're poor, right? If we value people on the basis of accomplishments, then we're saying that human worth is based on productivity. So there's all kinds of ways that that's going to get ugly if you play that game. And if you base it on, say, success, well, then whose definition of success? Whose narrative? Who, you know, are you privileging when you do that? Randy Paterson is the clinical psychologist who wrote the book on how to be miserable. Great book. Once compared the concept of self-esteem to a virus that escaped from a psychology laboratory. Albert Ellis, who's also a clinical psychologist, called self-esteem the greatest emotional disturbance known to man and woman. And Albert Ellis strongly advocated from separating your sense of self-worth from your performances, the behaviors that you engage in when you're trying to be a parent or a worker or an aristocrat. Okay. Ellis said that his self-worth would be unaffected if he murdered 20 people. He wouldn't accept the behavior. He wouldn't accept the murdering. There'd be consequences for that. He understands that. But his self-worth wouldn't change. And he had a technique or a therapy around that, which is called rational emotive behavior therapy, or EBT. And I posted a text that he wrote on this on Brightspace. It's not required reading, but if you struggle with your self-esteem, I thought, you might like this book. It's very readable, very interesting. So what these folks sort of advocate for is to construct people as having inherent worth. That's not a scientific thing. That's a philosophical thing. You just decide it. You just decide that you have inherent worth. That's not more or less than anyone else's. And everyone else has it too. And that has an adaptive function, because then worth is not conditional on anything that you do or you don't do. And instead, we could talk about how adaptive or maladaptive or effective that behavior was, right? We could think about how the behaviors impact others, right? Whether that impact is helpful or harmful. And it frees you up from all this kind of rumination and anxiety and I don't know, all that baggage, so that you can live in the present and focus on your goals and your relationships. You can be problem focused instead of self-focused. Right? So So they would say, go ahead and rate the efficacy of a behavior in its context, but not the worth of a person. But one of the things I notice a lot is that there are many people that do that. That's really common. A lot of people are tied up in those games, whether it's career or appearance. So there's a couple of studies on this, and they found that on average, the undergraduate students in their sample had high self-esteem and low distress tolerance. Distress tolerance is your ability to deal with failure, right? And anxiety and sadness and emotions that don't feel good. And that 80% of those students based their self-esteem on their academic performance. It's mostly your grades. It could also be like what your teachers think of you kind of thing. And those students who based their self-esteem on approval and on academic performance had more stress, they were more angry, they had more academic problems, more relationship conflicts, more issues with substances, more symptoms of eating disorders. Without higher academic performance, despite the fact that they were studying more. They were more academically engaged. And we often think more engagement is better, like more healthcare is better health. No, not necessarily. So they're studying more. They're going to lecture, they're trying harder. And it's not kind of working out. So contingent self-worth, conditional self-worth, when you don't have inherent self-worth, when your self-worth is based on something else, like someone approves of you, or you think you look pretty, or you get lots of Facebook likes, or you have a high-paying job, one of those things, okay, is reactive to successes and failures, and what did people think of this post, and should you get that, that kind of stuff. It's reactive success and failure. You feel great about your nose job, then you go back to baseline, start looking at something else you don't like, get more plastic surgery, okay? And makes people react to events or to feedback in ways that are sort of defensive. They serve to maintain or enhance self-esteem rather than achieve good outcomes. The way people react is about kind of ego. It's about preserving that conditional self-worth. And you'll see people do all kinds of mental acrobatics in order to preserve that sense of self-worth, conditional self-worth, when it is threatened. And it's very vulnerable and fragile when it's conditional. And so one thing that notice with students is that they engage in self-undermining. Sometimes there's different reasons people procrastinate, but one reason is that, well, let's say instead of putting in what would be a reasonable amount of time, you cram it all into the, last night before the test. You give yourself some really, really difficult circumstances. And so when you do poorly, you can protect yourself from the ego threat of saying, oh, I'm a bad student, and that's where I get my self-worth from. Instead, you can say, well, I stayed up all night. Okay, not handing it in, another good game. Okay, got a 0 because you didn't hand it in. Not because of your low academic ability, which is what you might be associating with your self-worth. For most students, if you just if you're like that, if that sounds like you, if you just hand the thing in, you'll probably do better than you expected. Usually goes like that. Not always. But the only way through that one is to confront it. Give yourself some reasonable time, do it, hand it in, go from there. So ideally, we have what you were suggesting, secure self-worth. And it's like what you were saying, it's like respecting yourself, accepting yourself, okay? And secure self-esteem does not need to be defended because it can't be threatened. There is a video that's quite heartwarming. I posted it to the Brightspace. It's an interview between Dolly Parton, who's a country singer, and Barbara Walters, who's a very class-privileged journalist. And Barbara Walters asked Dolly questions that are really insulting, that would just get under anyone's skin. Kind of like, do you know what people think that you look like trash? And they're really, I can't remember, like, or asking her like she's a redneck. And she really demonstrates that secure self-worth. Like, she doesn't care that people think that she has clownish makeup. That's what she likes to do, right? She knows her talents. And so she handles it with like a lot of grace and dignity. So back to this question of who are you? So there's different lenses we can look at that, like the sort of social constructive, perspective of what's your social role is one way to do that. Another lens is through the construct, the abstract idea, the construct of personality. And your textbook defines personality as an individual's characteristic pattern of thinking, feeling, and acting. You have a characteristic pattern of thinking, feeling, and acting. Are there ways that you act similar in different contexts? There's an assumption here that personality is stable across situations. Okay, that's an assumption behind the construct of personality. So let's say you take the personality test that I sent you and you clock high on extroversion. You're an extrovert. So then I would expect that you're going to be the kind of person that raises their hand in class, that chats up a lot of people at parties, that's outgoing at a networking event. And I would expect to see that pretty consistently in the things that you do and say. And I would expect that to be stable, and that in 20 years, you're still an extrovert. And that I'd guess that maybe you were an outgoing child and a bubbly baby. But we can criticize that concept. Like, do you really have a universal personality that's the same across all different contexts? Or are there different masks that you have for different contexts? So you were bringing up the idea of dress or costume. I don't dress or act the same way I do here as, let's say, when I'm with my friends. Like, this is kind of a persona. This is my kind of stage act. I just made it up one day. I'd start lecturing and I've gone with it. But are there sort of different versions of you? Do you have different masks? Are you the same in your student role as in your friend role, and your way you act in your job at work, and when you're with your dog, when you're with your family? Do you act in different ways? So could personality be context dependent? But maybe all my different personas are similar in certain ways. Maybe I always express similar values. Maybe I'm always being an extrovert. These are questions we can consider. The most famous personality theorist, the original personality theorist in psychology, is Sigmund Freud. And if you ask people to think of a psychologist, they usually say Freud. He actually was not a psychologist or a psychiatrist. He was a medical doctor. He was a neurologist. He liked cigars. And he's the founder of the field of psychodynamics. And psychodynamic theories would posit that your behavior comes out of a dynamic interaction between your conscious and your unconscious mind. But you're not conscious of your unconscious mind because it's unconscious. So now we have to say, what's in there? What is the unconscious mind according to Freud and colleagues. And we know there is an unconscious mind, but we understand it very differently today than Freud did when he first started thinking about it. He, as a doctor, he would see patients whose disorder didn't have any kind of clear physical explanations. They were neurotic. And his clients were these sort of upper middle class Viennese women. And he concluded that their problems reflected unacceptable thoughts and feelings that are hidden away in the unconscious mind. One example is glove anesthesia. So let's say you have a person that can't feel their hand. That doesn't have, to him, wouldn't have a clear physiological explanation because the nerves, the innervation of your hand and arm work in such a way that you shouldn't have a situation where you can't feel your hand, but you can feel your arm. What I would say to that now is that innervation isn't the same thing as perception. Right? People can have their limbs cut off. There's no nerves because there's no more limb, and they still feel it. Right? They can feel themselves moving their hand, but they don't have a hand anymore. But this is what Freud is thinking. Person can't feel her hand. Well, it must be because you used it to masturbate. And you feel so guilty about that that you just stopped being able to feel your hand. That's how you dealt with that one. You know, it's a starting place. Disciplines start somewhere. I mean, look at chemistry. It used to be alchemy. They were trying to turn piss into gold. We've come along over the last 100, 200 years. And Freud's view of the structure of personality was he thought there were three parts. And part of it is unconscious. We call that the id. And it's full of your sort of unacceptable animalistic impulses, which are basically sex and aggression, sex and death. You are a very polite upper middle class Viennese woman, and you don't have a sex drive. That would be inappropriate. Has to be unconscious. And then there's your conscious mind, but you also have a kind of higher part of yourself that's full of ideals. And your ego is trying to deal with conflicts between the id and the superego. So Freud thought that the id was totally unconscious. You do not know that you have a sex drive. Okay. And the ego is just trying to deal with this battle between your higher ideals and values in your superego, and then your animalistic instincts. And well, kind of like a bit of a shoulder angel, shoulder devil situation. Except in his model, you're not conscious of the shoulder devil that is the id. We don't understand what's causing these neurotic behaviors in you. Neither do you. That's why you need help from Freud. So the person that, so let's say that you have a dream, and your dream is about smoking cigars. Well, you're just aware that it's a dream about cigars. That's the manifest content of the dream. But what would Freud think the cigar is really about? Yes. Yes, that is yes. It means that you have an urge to engage in oral sexual activities, but you can't tell yourself that. So you're having a dream about smoking cigars. Okay. And so the latent content would be the penis thing. And so the person that makes the decision about what the symbols mean is the psychoanalyst. And so the technique there is free association. So you lay on the couch and you just scream of consciousness, talk about what's going on, talk about your dreams. And I'm sitting there behind you with my clipboard, figuring out how it's really all about penises. Psychoanalysis moved on from Freud, and I'm making fun of him a little, so maybe I'm not totally doing him justice. But the idea is that the psychoanalyst would be the one that's kind of pulling out, reading this for symbolism so that we can find out what your unconscious conflict is. And then we could help you find a more adaptive way of dealing with that. We help you resolve that so that then you'll be able to feel your hand again. So how would you assess this unconscious mind and what's going on in it? And dreams are one way that psychologists have tried to do that. Maybe it comes up in your dreams. Anyone recognize what that is? Yeah. And what is a Rorschach test? Yes. Exactly. So it asks you what you see in that. What do you see in that? Yes. That's really cute. I like the elephants. Now, what does that mean about you? I thought it was like people with cone hats giving each other a high five. Right. Yes. So can you louder? 2 garden gnomes. Yes, I think the people with hats could also be garden gnomes. Yes. Looks okay. Now, how do I interpret this? Yes.
Pay attention to the actual colored spaces more than negative space in the middle there.
Yeah.
I saw either like a jet or the tower. The negative space.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I see that now. But now here's the next problem. Interesting conversation starter. But how do I interpret that? Like, what would be a valid interpretation of elephants, vagina, CN tower, garden gnomes? Like, where do I go with that? Like, because it's supposed to tell me about your unconscious mind. I know where you guys are going with vaginas and towers, but garden gnomes, elephants. So this is the most widely used projective test. And there's no valid way to interpret it. Okay, I'd just be speculating. Right? Like, do you have objectophilia and an interest in garden gnomes? And let's say I say that, and you're like, no, I'm definitely not interested in garden gnomes. Well, then I'd say, well, that's you're in denial. It's a defense mechanism. Here's another one. What's that? What's going on there? The thematic apperception test. You see ambiguous scenarios. Yes.
Maybe, should I like interpret what I see?
Yeah.
Maybe she killed him and now
She kills him. Okay, so oh no, maybe you're dangerous. I don't know. If let's say I was a prison psychologist and we're thinking about your parole. Well, I can't let you out now. Yes.
I saw that maybe he's sick and she doesn't want him to know that she's like super upset about it. She's trying to be strong for him, so she left the room to dry.
Oh, wow, you must be such a giving, modest person. No?
I don't know how to do that.
Yes.
He fell asleep with his lover and she found out he was cheating.
Oh, and you have a history of betrayal. So you can have interesting conversations, but I feel like they could, yes.
Maybe he like came home from the bar late and she's like upset about it.
Okay. Yeah, can't take this anymore. But what do you do with that data once you've collected it? Yes.
She probably caught him cheating. You just can't see the girl because she's on the other side.
Oh, she caught him cheating. What are you thinking about?
No, it's the girl on the other side of the bed. You can't see. And she's crying.
Okay. I feel like if I had power, it could be a little bit dangerous for me to decide, you know, what's going on with you, who you are, what you might do based on your interpretation of that. Which could come from so many different places. Could be related to something that happened to you earlier in the day. When I saw that, I just thought of COVID. So these are a little risky. And it's sort of part of that more artistic, symbolic side of psychology. So Freud believed that there were two fundamental instincts in your id. One for life and one for death and destruction. And he called them Eros and Thanatos. Do you remember Eros? Psyche's boyfriend? Yeah? Okay. The ancient Greek god of love and particularly of sexual desire. Okay. He's in the myth of Psyche. She's doing it all to be with him. And Thanatos is the ancient Greek personification of death. He's the son of night and darkness, and his siblings are old age, suffering, doom, deception, blame, retribution, and the boatmen of the underworld. What a family. So Freud believed that fundamental life force was erotic, sexual, and he called it the libido. He defined it as the energy regarded as a quantitative magnitude of those instincts that have to do with all that might be comprised for the word love. But to Freud, love is sex. So it's this instinctual energy or force in your unconscious that's basically sexual. And to Freud, it's like the fundamental motivational force, along with that sort of destructive death instinct, but you're unconscious of it. And he thought that the libido develops through childhood, okay? And that therefore personality development should be complete by puberty. And so we thought there was a series of developmental phases in which the libido fixates on different erogenous zones. So babies like to suck on things. That must be about their sex drive. Okay, and then, well, there's that whole pooping thing when you're about 2 in the potty training. And, you know, maybe that, if you have control issues, that's what that could be about. So they kind of went wrong in your potty training phase. Okay? And then there's the phallic stage around 3 to 6 years, where the pleasure zone is the genitals. And this is the point where you realize as a boy that you are in fact in love with your mother, your father. It's called the Oedipus complex. And it's a universal stage, according to Freud, that all little boys have to go through. He knows that because he went through it. So it must be true of everyone else. But what if you're a girl? What's going to happen when around this age, maybe you've seen your little brothers? What do you realize about yourself? It could be psychologically traumatic. It's going to break you. Shocking realization. Shatters your psyche. Yes.
The boys have a penis, you know?
You don't have a penis. That's terrible. How can you live to not have a penis? Well, fortunately, according to Freud, there is a way you can resolve this. Okay? As an adult, you can have a heterosexual relationship with a man. But through him, you can experience the having a penis, and then you will be whole again. Now, then there is, according to him, a latency period where kids just don't seem to be talking about or thinking about sex all the time. But then, in the genital phase, around puberty, there's a maturation of the sexual interests. But if you're a sort of upper middle class woman, you're not allowed to have those. So he believed that all children pass through these stages, but something could happen, like your toilet training got messed up, that could leave you with a kind of personality disorder, right? An unresolved conflict that's the cause of your neurosis. And so, and what happens when in neurosis is, according to Freud, is that your pleasure-seeking impulse, instead of having developed nicely, is stuck at a certain stage. So let's say that you get stuck at the toilet training, the potty training phase, right? Maybe your mom did it wrong and you're chastised for your toilet training accidents. Okay, and so you get satisfaction from a sense of control. Well, then you would develop personality traits that are associated with control. You're stubborn, you're orderly, you're disciplined, frugal. Modern personality trait theory, which we'll learn about next class, the hexaco, might see that person as having high conscientiousness or low agreeableness. We'll talk about what those means next day. But in Freud's view, that's because your libido is stuck at that stage. Okay. And then let's say that you just had way too much fun pooping. Your mom's like, yes, good job. Wow. You know, there's that thing where kids like want to show the poop to you. So imagine if your mom was like so into that. Great job. Well, then you're getting pleasure from defecation. And so you might develop personality traits that are what we call anal expulsive. The other one's anal retentive, right? Which you would say are sadism, cruelty, emotional outbursts, rebelliousness, carelessness, disorganization. Modern personality trait theory would have a different way of looking at that. Maybe you call that low conscientiousness, maybe be low honesty or humility. Okay, your id is unconscious. You don't know about it. And your ego is trying to navigate this conflict between your id and your superego, which is more about social expectations and ideals and that sort of thing. So the ego has to protect itself and do weird things. And Freud called those defense mechanisms. And he said that the fundamental defense mechanism is repression. You just try to repress that, not think about it. Just stop feeling your hand. And he identified many different defense mechanisms. This table is in your text. And the point I want to make here is that these are phenomena that exist. You will see people engage in denial when they're threatened by something, right? You will see people dissociate, right? That's when your mind's just not there anymore. But there's so many reasons that people dissociate, right? You're going to spend a lot of time in this class dissociated because the human attention span is only like 15 minutes, and this is a 75-minute lecture, so you're going to dissociate. So the fact that dissociation is real doesn't prove Freud's theory about this whole id, ego, superego, libido stuff, because there's many alternative explanations for why people dissociate. But dissociation is a way that you can protect yourself from stress or anxiety, right? Children who are abused can develop these multiple personalities because they just dissociate so hard, they kind of come up with a new identity. So it's true that you can dissociate as a way of dealing with something. You know, a really super stressful situation, just think about something else. Okay. And we do project, Freud projected his feelings about his mother onto everyone else. So just because that these phenomena are real doesn't prove Freud's theory to be true, because there's other explanations for them. So the point of psychoanalysis is for the psychoanalyst to figure out what this conflict is and to thereby help you resolve it somehow. Freud left quite a legacy, and his intellectual descendants took psychodynamic personality theory away from all that sexual stuff and took it towards social conflicts. So conflicts between, what you want and what sort of society wants. And that includes Alfred Adler's idea that people's behavior could be explained by an inferiority complex. It includes Jung's idea of a collective unconscious that has certain key social roles in it. And it includes Erikson's theory of psychosocial development. So Erik Erikson thought that there are different conflicts, psychosocial conflicts, that people deal with at different ages. And you need to resolve them in order to continue to mature. Otherwise, you get stuck at that stage. There are stages, and if you don't resolve a conflict, you get stuck at the stage, and that's why you're dysfunctional, is a psychodynamic way of thinking, of looking at things. So Erikson's theory would say that now, so you guys are, some of you are in adolescence, if you're 17, 18, and some of you are in young adulthood. And Erikson would say that at this stage, you're trying to figure out your identity. Who are you? What should you be doing? You might even feel lost. And that you need to resolve that in order to get them to the next stage, which is finding your partner and sort of learning to love. But this is an idea, and well, why can't you figure out, relationships before you figure out what you want to do with your career? Okay, and he has a cycle whereby kind of at the end you're looking back and saying, did I live a good life, or is it all despair? Well, I had my best friend had cystic fibrosis. She couldn't wait to figure things out at 80. Okay, so is it true that you have to go through these stages? No, I think she got to the what matters in life is your relationships thing really quickly, way faster than I ever did. So this is an idea. Okay, it's a theory. It's a way we think about things. It's a starting place. But it's easy to knock Freud, right? Many of his claims don't have any scientific support. They overestimate the role of childhood, right? Your personality develops after childhood. A lot of the predictions are unfalsifiable. So let's say I tell you that you have this unconscious conflict, that's something about your childhood and your mother, and you say, no, that's the crazy, no. Well, you're in denial. See, it kind of works. See how that one works? I can't be wrong. But he did make his contributions. He did start us thinking about the unconscious mind, thinking about conflicts between your biological impulses and social restraints, thinking about sexuality at a time when it was not appropriate to think about that. Those children were delivered by storks. Okay, and he thought about the psychology of thinking about death. That's a thing. Okay, and the defense mechanisms worked, was pretty cool. Psychodynamic personality theories are limited because they're based on dysfunction. Well, limited for a lot of other reasons, but they're all about dysfunction. And consider that Freud based universal theories of personality on neurotic clients. Abraham Maslow did the opposite. He picked his favorite people, read their autobiographies, and based his ideas of personality about that. So it's different, right? It's about what makes people thrive and contribute, but you can see that there's still bias there, because what people did he like? Who wrote those well, they wrote their autobiographies, but he liked Abraham Lincoln, but do you think Abraham Lincoln is great? I don't know. What about Donald Trump? What if you based a personality theory on his autobiography? Like the art of the deal. Like who do you pick to go into that group? Carl Rogers had this person-centered perspective, and it was about, he was thinking, it's a very counseling kind of way of doing things. You know, what are the environments that people flourish in? And to him, well-being was about growing towards who you want to be. I could criticize that. Like, why does well-being have to be constant striving? Can't you be happy with who you are? Carl Rogers used what he called talk therapy. And it's like a conversation between the therapist and the client, not the patient, not using the medical model, that helps them change, be happier, overcome problems. This is a different way of doing things than the guy on the couch, right? You'll see in many of your psychology and management textbooks this hierarchy of needs that is attributed to Abraham Maslow. Abraham Maslow had an idea that he was interested in social dominance hierarchies, and he thought that social hierarchies reflected dominance, like there's dominant people on the top, dominating everyone else. And he thought that was universal, and in order to test that, he went and stayed with the Blackfoot people in Alberta, and he was really surprised to find a different social organization where there was high levels of cooperation, where wealth was defined by generosity to others, not by how much you have, where people who messed up weren't just kind of cast out and punished. They were, people tried to help them get back on the right path. They could sort of redeem themselves. And so he did come up with sort of a theory that there's certain needs you have to have met before you can self-actualize and sort of become the most that you can be. But this isn't empirically validated. That pyramid is something that textbook authors came up with. It's not actually in his work. But it makes a nice figure. And so people like putting it in textbooks, and that's why it keeps being in textbooks. And in his later life, he actually stopped talking about self-actualization, and he was focused on self-transcendence. He had a more communitarian way of thinking later in his life. I'd also pick on the idea, like when they talk about needs, like what does it need? I'd say food is a need, water is a need, air is a need, but is sex a need? Can you live without that? Could you survive? Right? What's the difference between a need and a drive? Maslow had an idea of what self-actualized people look like, but this is opinion, right? It's very subjective, right? Like, why do you have to have spiritual peak experiences when you feel one with everyone? What's wrong with difference? So humanistic theories have had a lot of impact, especially in counseling, education, child raising. Okay, it's associated with the positive psychology movement. But we can criticize it, a lot of vague, fuzzy, subjective concepts. You can say that it's still individualistic, like you being the best you can be and growing to everything you can become. Well, why is it about you? And why is well-being constant striving? The textbook picks on the idea of unconditional positive regard. I would say that's a therapeutic tool where the sort of humanistically oriented psychotherapist always treats their client with unconditional positive regard, as long as the client keeps paying their bills. There isn't, unconditional positive regard isn't really something we're entitled to from others. It's people who expect it can be a bit dysfunctional. Like if you came to school, with a gun, it's not like everyone would treat you with unconditional positive regard, where positive means wanting to sort of gravitate towards you, that probably run away. I'll end today on type theories of personality, and then next lecture we'll talk about trait theories. But type theories of personality say there's so many types of people. The zodiac says there's 12 kinds of people. So does the Chinese zodiac, but this time it's not based on the constellation. It's like, are you born in the year of the tiger or the year of the rabbit? And there's a lot of them. And one of them is that RIASEC test I sent you, of vocational personality. It says that there's 6 types of vocational interests. Like you could be an artist, or maybe you're an investigator. Okay, there's a whole bunch of them. And one of them is Jung's idea that there's people could be like the characters in a story. And Jung thought that there were, he read myths from all over the world. And he thought there seemed to be kind of 12 different characters. A lot of them have like 12, right? The zodiac, and this is another 12 one. So maybe, you know, there's a hero in a story. How are you like a hero? Maybe there's kind of a mother figure. Maybe there's a king or a ruler figure. Maybe there's a challenger figure. Okay, maybe there's a lover figure. And so these are all roles that have social scripts. The RIASEC is the only type theory of personality that I'm aware has much significant empirical support. There's still lots of limitations with it. It's kind of about what you like to do, what you enjoy doing. Are you the kind of type of person that enjoys being in a lecture? Or would you rather be tinkering with the engine of a car or drawing something? Okay, and so one of them is investigative. This is an investigative setting. Maybe you like it. And so I had you take that test, and I haven't asked you to, we're not done with it yet. Did anyone take the test? Yes. And did you get, what did you get? Did you get you got a graph, right? And so it says, like, I guess for you, investigative is on top.
I don't know how to read the graph.
Okay, so excellent question. How do you read the graph? So you look at which one you are highest on, and which one are you second highest on, and which one are you sort of third highest on, and then we're going to get a 3-letter code out of that. Yes.
At what point does multiple parts of the graph
Are they the same point? The theory can't cope with that.
You know, like there's for instance, both I think that enterprising and social both imply
At the same, well, you have to pick one. So like my 3-letter code, I think, is SAI. So social, I'm a teacher. That's a helping thing, kind of like being a nurse. Artistic, investigative. So you have
like
SIA. Okay, very similar. So you get a code. Any questions about the code? We're going to come back to this in the IO psychology unit, where we'll plug this in to a database, and I'll tell you what job it thinks you should have. Okay, so next lecture I will talk about, hey guys, 2 more minutes. Okay, 2 more minutes. Next class, I'm going to talk about personality trait theories. And so I sent you the Hexago personality test. Okay, that's the 6-factor model. So please take that, and we're going to discuss how to read those scores. Are there any questions? No? Okay, I'm going to stop the recording, and I'll be available for a few minutes.